If you ask many African countries, what is your interest? They will not tell you, because on the one hand, we as a continent are saying under Africa Agenda 2063 and Africa Continental Free Trade Area that we are going to enhance intra-African trade, that we are going to ensure that we work as a team. But if you look at what African countries are doing, diplomatically, we are moving further and further apart, and we can see effectively what can be characterized as a scramble for Africa. There is a scramble for Africa where countries are coming to Africa and trying to take African resources, and we are gleefully running to Washington and being treated like high school children by the President of the United States of America.
Hey there and welcome to Fanya Mambo Africa. Super excited that we are coming to the end of the year. And of course, to do that, we have to look at the diplomatic affairs that have taken place across Africa with the different nations, the continent, the world. And of course, for such a conversation, we have none other than Senior Counsel, Professor PLO Lumumba.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Congratulations. You were accorded the title the other day.
Well, it's proper that when you're in a profession, you get to the pinnacle of it, and that is something to be appreciated.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Congrats. Yeah. And karibu sana. I don't know why my glasses are becoming foggy for some reason, but we can hold for a few minutes. So I want us to start this conversation with how Kenya has been in terms of its diplomacy and foreign affairs for the year 2025. We've had many instances, but how do you look at us and rate us?
On a scale of 1 to 10, 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10 because we have been ambivalent. We, as they used to say, never missed the opportunity to miss the opportunity. And look at it in several levels or at several levels. Look at the manner in which we have conducted ourselves regarding the Gaza war, the war between Israel and the Palestinians. While the rest of Africa has clarity, there is clarity in South Africa, there is clarity in most of Africa, we are ambivalent. In fact, we appear to have been on the side of the oppressor. You've seen the manner in which we conducted ourselves in South Sudan when there was a crisis.
Yeah.
Our special envoy was sent there and effectively rejected by both Uganda and South Sudan. You've seen the manner in which we conducted ourselves in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And if you look at our conduct once again, it is what has led to the agreement between President Tshisekedi and President Kagame in Washington. That should have been mediated in Nairobi. And remember that our president is the current chairman of the East African Community.
Yes.
One would have thought that that kind of conflict would have been mediated here in Nairobi, remembering, as I've already said, our president is the chairman of the East African Community, and we also had the secretariat of the East African Community. We also remember that at a time when we have problems in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we hosted former President Joseph Kabila here, creating great anger in Kinshasa. And as if that was not enough, in Sudan, we hosted the rebels here in Nairobi, Kenya, at a time when we ought to be showing leadership. At a time when the rest of the world, the rest of Africa is rejecting French diplomacy and its pernicious neocolonialism, we have entered into a defense pact with France. Really, if any person or any country was to get it wrong, this is the way to get it wrong. And this is unfortunate because there is a sense in which this country, being the third most important capital of the United Nations, ought to conduct herself in a totally different way, so that our diplomacy is a diplomacy that is not ambivalent. It is something that can be predicted to the extent that prediction is necessary and relevant, but we don't. Our voice is confusing.
You've mentioned the issue of France, which I think broke out for Kenya yesterday or just a few days ago. Why do you think the government of Kenya has gone to that direction of signing that pact? Yet, when you look across Africa, every country, especially the ones that were colonized by France, are actually chasing them away.
I mean, the French no longer had the sway that they did in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, in Guinea, in Senegal, and we are embracing them. We were never a French colony, and one can barely understand. I've not, of course, had the advantage of reading the document, but I have glimpses of it. That the French will enjoy reciprocity, that they'll be involved in our maritime matters for purposes of protection. One is not saying that we should not have some kind of relationship with countries in the world, but it's as if we are laughing at other African countries and saying, what you reject is what we embrace, and I cannot understand. And one of the most unfortunate things is that many of these things are being done by dint of executive fiat. Our people are not heard through their representatives. When countries enter into agreements of such a nature, courtesy demands that it is dealt with thoroughly in Parliament, is debated robustly in Parliament. But what we now see is what I see administration through bypass. You bypass Parliament, you convene cabinet, and then essentially have decisions which are made through executive fiat being given endorsement by a compliant cabinet. It is unfortunate, it is contempt for the people of Kenya, and is the way not to govern.
And what does it mean for Kenya in terms of our diplomacy with the fellow Africans? Because we're not an island.
Not just fellow Africans, let's start in the region. The whole idea of East African Federation is that we should be pulling in the same direction. The question that I want to ask, do the Ugandans know? Do the Rwandese know? Do the Burundians know? Do the South Sudanese know? Do the Somalis know? Do the Congolese know? And the answer is they are not involved. We are actually undermining East African Federation that we want to move towards. We are undermining the African Union when we say that we should have a single diplomatic voice. We are moving in a different direction, and our voices are discordant. And it's unfortunate that we are doing that at this time.
When you look at the signing that the agreement, the Congo-Rwanda agreement that was signed in Washington just a few weeks ago, and Kenya again was involved, what is it? Why was it critical for Kenya to be in that meeting?
I think from a Trump perspective, the appearance of Kenya and Angola was a token appearance. Remember that the Angolan president at one time tried to mediate.
Yeah.
You remember at one time Kenya tried to mediate. I think it is former President Uhuru Kenyatta who was involved in the Nairobi initiative. So in that sense, there was an attempt to play some diplomacy. But if you look at it properly and you look at the body language of everybody, Kenya and Angola were playing the gooseberry. There was no substantive role that they were playing. And in any event, that particular treaty, or not treaty, but that particular agreement was dead on arrival. Because no sooner had it been signed, no sooner had the ink dried on it than the conflict escalated with the M23 capturing Uvira. And the conflict continues. The conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo is so nuanced that if you want to have easy solutions, you get it wrong. And diplomatically, of course, if you look even at the body language of the president of DRC, you could see that he was not interested. The only reason why they are attending such conferences is because the Americans, being the hegemon that they are, is actually dictating to countries, come to Washington or we sanction you.
So
and
they
it's
were
much
going to
more
experience
out of
sanctions.
fear. It is much more out of fear that African countries are trooping to Washington, D.C.
You know, during that meeting, Trump was clear. We are coming for the minerals and everyone gets money. And even I think 2-3 days later, he said it. The presidents of Congo and Rwanda told me to come for the minerals. So for him, the interests are clear. What is in it for the Congolese and the Rwandese then?
you know, Sarah, one of the most unfortunate things in the continent of Africa is that we don't define our interests. The Americans are clear. Whether it is during the presidency of Trump, he says America first, is now saying America only, I think. Make America great again, the MAGA group. And they are clear. Their relationship and their diplomacy is transactional. And one may say parasitic. What do they want in these days of artificial intelligence? You want rare earth. Africa is the home of rare earth. What the Chinese have, they are not selling to anybody. So they are clear. But if you ask Congo, if you ask many African countries, what is your interest? They will not tell you. Because on the one hand, we as a continent are saying under Africa Agenda 2063 and Africa Continental Free Trade Area that we are going to enhance intra-African trade, that we are going to ensure that we work as a team. But if you look at what African countries are doing, diplomatically, we are moving further and further apart, and we can see effectively what can be characterized as a scramble for Africa. There is a scramble for Africa where countries are coming to Africa and trying to take African resources. And we are gleefully running to Washington and being treated like high school children by the President of the United States of America.
Again, I don't know why for Kenya. Then there's the question of there's an analysis I was watching, and the South Africans were feeling like it was a South African analysts, and they were saying Kenya now has become like the go point for Trump if he needs anything in Africa, and also considering that we had been given the non-NATO ally status. What is this making these other people feel about us? Because if South Africa is looking at it and saying, oh, they were called when there was this pact, oh, they are signing health deals. Yet for South Africa, it's actually a fight between them and the US.
You know, there was a period immediately after President Ruto became the president of the Republic of Kenya, there was a dalliance with the Biden administration. And as I've said elsewhere, he was seen as the blue-eyed boy of this administration. But when Trump went into office, there was a cooling of relationship culminating in the postponed visit of Vice President Vance. We thought that things were going south as regards the relationship between Kenya and the United States of America. But very quickly, geopolitically, Kenya is placed in a position that is enviable. Secondly, Kenya has a history of what I call diplomatic ambivalence. And because of that, it would appear to me that Kenya is susceptible to manipulation. Let me just be blunt about it. Thirdly, it is also the case that Kenya is going to be the home of some of the UN agencies that are moving from the United States of America. So I think properly guided, the Trump administration has recognized that if you want to do anything, then geopolitically, Kenya is the anchor country, and there are many advantages in terms of Kenya's location and history, which you don't have with Uganda, which you don't have with Tanzania, which you don't have with Ethiopia. So Kenya is coming out very badly in the African scene as this country which pulls in a different direction, which this country that is prepared to tango with the United States of America and other powers which are doing things that are inimical to the overall interest of the of a united Africa. As you can see, as Kenya is enjoying this cordial, cozy relationship with the United States of America, South Africa is being ostracized. Yeah. They are being told, we will not even invite you to the G20 meeting scheduled to take place in the United States in the year 2026. We will not deal with you. We are going to sanction you. And you see, Nigeria also has travel advisories, the entire Sahel. Yeah. So that Kenya is coming out very badly diplomatically. And I do not know whether we want to be in a neighborhood where we are seen as a pariah nation.
Is this ambivalence a good thing or a bad thing? Because they say in diplomacy, you need to know your interests, know the other party's interests, and know where the interests meet.
It is a bad thing. It is a bad thing because you have no clarity. It appears that you have no strategic interest. What is Kenya's strategic diplomatic interest in the context of East Africa, in the context of Africa? Why is it that a country that wants to be in a strategic place of being a leader in the continent of Africa pulling away from the rest of Africa? Look, for example, the health deal that was signed between Kenya and the United States, and an agreement signed a little earlier in the year with the European Union. If you are the chair of the East African community, is it not a situation that calls for an urgent meeting of the heads of states and government of East African community and saying, we cannot sign these things bilaterally. Let us tell the United States of America that we are going to do deals with them in the context of East Africa. But we don't do that. It is almost as if we are saying, oh, we are the good boys. We are we used to call them when we were in high school, the teacher's pet. And therefore you get goodies that everybody else does not get, and we are excited and over the moon about it. I don't think that that is what role we want to play in this day and age. In this day and age, when we are talking about Pan-Africanism, in this day and age, when we want to liberate ourselves and to decolonize our institutions, to tango beyond the limits of decency with erstwhile colonizers and latter-day neocolonizers, I think there must be clarity. We don't have such clarity.
You know, for me, it's also interesting that we signed the health deal. Uganda also signed a different, well, it's a health deal still, but it's different. But in the same time, Tanzania has been added to the list of danger zones where you can't just travel to the US. So what is Trump playing with these countries?
Divide and rule, divide and dominate, divide and conquer. This has been the modus operandi of the West. What we see happened before. And you go and do your thing with Uganda, do your thing with the Kenya, do your thing with other countries, poison the environment so that they operate in an environment of suspicion. And once you make them weak, you dominate them. What is sad in Africa is that we appear never to learn from history. We repeat the same mistakes, yet the script is the same. Divide and dominate, divide and conquer, divide and confuse.
But do we have the will for a united EAC, leave alone African Union?
It would appear to be, on the evidence that is available in the political arena, it is not self-evident. In the early days, when you saw people who are willing to move in one direction, it was self-evident. Today, you don't see it. People to people, you can see the thirst and hunger for people in Uganda, Tanzania, and all these countries wanting to work and act as one. But at the political leadership level, beyond the rhetoric, you don't see anything. Look at the East African community as I speak now. Luckily, Kenya, I believe, is the only country that has paid all its dues. The other countries are either unwilling or unable or reluctant to pay their dues, with the consequence that workers in the East African community are not getting paid on time. That in itself is indicative of the manner in which ESE is being treated.
Something else that would be very interesting to look at is because you see ESE has done that part. Then there's the African Union where, as you pointed out, the Congo conflict, there's the Sudan conflict. African Union has just been noting with concern.
You know, I get at a personal level so disgusted when I see the leadership of the African Union at the top level simply issuing what I call pro forma perfunctory statements. We note with concern, as you've already indicated. And I see a little country like Qatar, which is smaller than Greater Nairobi, is the one that is ruling the roost. That African heads of states and government are invited to Doha, and the African Union sits in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, noting with concern. How weak can an organization be? Because our equivalent in terms of organizational size, just to talk of size, does not exist. The European Union only has 27 members. We have nearly 54 members, with a population of 1.4 billion.
Yeah.
We should be present. We should provide leadership. Addis Ababa, Ethiopia should be known as the Mecca for peacemaking, so that if there is any peace to be made, it is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, not in Doha, not in Washington, D.C., not in Istanbul, in Turkey. We should be ashamed. Our political leadership and leaders of our institutions should be ashamed of themselves. What we see is very shallow diplomacy, receiving letters of credence, and is sad, unfortunate. For those who don't care, well, it's neither here nor there. But for the few who want to see Africa elevated to a level of respect, it is painful to watch.
Yeah. And I mean, to an extent, it's not all lost. We had elections, I think, was it early this year or late last year, in Namibia and in Botswana. And somehow those two presidents have been getting praise. They've been getting the work done. What is it they have done different that everyone is looking at saying, oh, Botswana is on the right track. Oh, Namibia, the lady is doing a great job.
I think there is not all doom and gloom. That is one of the things that we know, and it's not for the faint-hearted. There are few countries that have demonstrated that things can be done well. Botswana, small population. Namibia, small population, but the elections were conducted in a manner that was satisfactory. But let us not forget Ghana.
Yeah.
Ghana also conducted successful elections, and to his credit, President John Dramani Mahama has been trying to repair some of the damage that was caused by the departure of the Sahelian countries of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. So Ghana has also stood out in that regard. But we have seen other elections, as we've already said, that puts Africa on a very painful space. That is Cameroon, or Guinea-Bissau, even La Côte d'Ivoire, Mozambique. So there is a sense in which it is the best of times and the worst of times, to remember those words of Charles Dickens in A Tale of Two Cities. But we've got to build on what there is. And you can see between Namibia and Botswana, there is already an attempt to remove tariff and non-tariff barriers going forward. One hopes that some of these baby steps will mature and that we'll see a continent that moves, even if that movement is tottering along. And the voices of goodwill must never be silent, even when it appears darkest.
You've been traversing the continent a lot and for a long time. I don't know if you've gotten a chance to visit the Sahel region and how the three countries are performing. I don't know if Guinea-Bissau and Benin? Well, I don't think Benin will join since it was, but I don't know if Guinea-Bissau will be joining them. But how would you rate their performance?
You know, I've been to all the Sahelian countries in the last 1 year, and one sees people who want genuine change. But it must be understood that military intervention, as Kwame Nkrumah rightly said, should be a stopgap intervention so that people have time to organize themselves. The reason why militaries intervene in certain cases is because the people have lost faith in the ballot box. And you could see the manner in which the leadership in Guinea-Conakry was received, the leadership in Niger, the leadership in Mali, and the leadership in Burkina, is because people are tired. They know that your typical African politician has perfected the art of manipulating the ballot process. And the people are crying for something. The people are crying for a leadership that is different. Do we say that the military juntas are providing it? In my view, not. But it creates an opportunity for us as a people to interrogate what methods of leadership should we have going forward. But remember that in many of those countries, there's also insurgency, which is sponsored and supported by certain European powers to ensure that there is instability. And that is where it becomes necessary for Africans to rally behind all these individuals who are in leadership, and not just them, but their people. And it gladdens my heart that within the Sahelian formation, they have seen the wisdom of working as a team. I hope that going forward, and I've seen the suggestion that President John Dramani Mahama becomes the chair of the African Union, I hope that during his tenure, he'll work to bring back everybody into the fold so that we rethink, this idea that every country that has an unconstitutional change of power is ostracized is very short-sighted. You are looking at the symptoms, not the causes. Why don't you ask, how are the elections conducted? Were they conducted in a manner that there were actually constitutional coups, which are being corrected extraordinarily through military intervention? These are the things that ought to be on the table. And one is seeing these early signs. You've seen in the recent past, some of us have been to Niger, to Bamako, to Burkina, to Guinea-Conakry, with a view to sending a clear message that what the people of Africa want is governance that is responsive to the needs of the people.
But sadly, or on the flip side, it's not always Africans that are supporting fellow Africans. When Benin happened, we saw Nigeria sent there for attack. Because I don't know if it's a fear of that now, these are our neighbors, so we could be next.
I think it is a combination of all those things. But I'm told there was a phone call in the case of the intervention of Nigeria in Benin.
Yeah.
Who made the phone call, if it is true that a phone call was made?
Rumor has it it's Macron.
Rumor has that it was France that made the phone call.
Yeah.
And one can understand why they made it. If they did, they are losing their control and they cannot afford it. It is also true that in the case of Nigeria, they would not want a coup d'etat so close to them, because some coups are actually copycat coups. In the case of Guinea-Bissau, we know that it was a cosmetic coup d'etat, that the opposition actually, from the evidence on the ground, the opposition was headed to victory. And that in order to torpedo that reality, the president and President Goodluck Jonathan, who headed a mission there, is as clear as saying that is the one of the few occasions where the deposed president is the one who says there was a coup d'etat. So there is a sense in which the problems and situations in Africa sometimes are so convoluted that one cannot speak with absolute confidence that the perspective they have represents the truth.
But at what point do then our African leaders stop being puppets? Because that was a Nigerian call. Again, when we started, we had the issue of our leaders going to Washington.
You know, when you have no confidence, when you still labor under low self-esteem, when you still hold the view that you need approval from Washington or from London or from Paris or Brussels or Madrid or Lisbon, then you are in trouble. And it appears to me that except for very few politicians, I'm one who is reluctant to use the word leader in respect of some of the individuals who occupy certain political offices in Africa, then the tendency is to just wait for approval from London or from Lisbon or from Washington. And you don't care about your population. You spend billions or millions to rush 13,000 kilometers, and if you ask the individual, what exactly were you going to do? Having spent so much money, they too cannot tell you. Perhaps if they were honest, they would say, I went out of fear, or two, I wanted to look like a good boy, because most of them are boys. I'm using the word boy as a term of art.
Yeah.
And I want to look good. I want to be in their good books, because that also immunizes me from a number of things. That is all they have to bring home. Meanwhile, in your home arena, you can't pay pending bills. You can't pay your teachers. You can't pay your lecturers. You can't do critical things. You are borrowing like the end of the world. It's sad.
And for Nigeria, also, what I found perplexing in a way is that there is that call about sorting the coup, but at the same time, they have an attack from the US president. So is he trying to look towards France because maybe Trump is not looking friendly, or is it because Trump had said we want to send immigrants and they said no?
I'm not an expert in that area, but I can hazard what I will call a guess. Because American foreign policy is so unpredictable, leaders in Africa are hedging their bets. They are hedging their bets because the United States of America may say one thing today from Washington, D.C. and another tomorrow. So where do you go next? You run to a European power which still makes the claim that is a power and is struggling to be the most dominant Western European power, and that is France now.
Yeah.
Because the British are too silent. So the French are trying to reassert themselves. So I think it is a question of hedging bets. If I lose the United States of America, let me have France, because France is present, is a nuclear power. It is present in our oceans. It can help us when push comes to shove. And in any event, they are all Caucasians. Let's be blunt about it. They can talk to each other as cousins and tell each other, let us spare them. This is our sphere of influence. What I call the Berlin Conference syndrome is still alive and well.
In 2025.
Everybody knows that, except it would appear our African leaders. In 2025, is still alive and well.
Pretty
Europe and
sad.
America sees Africa as spheres of influence. Sad.
When you look at the way generally Africa has had the relations that have been in 2025 and even the signing agreements that have been done, how do you say that is looking like, and what have been the pros and cons for Africa, say for this year?
Number one, it would appear to me that this has been a year where we have seen many conflicts of different intensities and different nuances taking root. So that if you look at the entire, look to the West, you see coup d'etats are becoming almost fashionable for reasons that are known, because it is an indictment of governance. If you look at South Sudan, you see the country has simply fallen apart. And we have refugees, estimates say as many as 12 million refugees, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world as we now speak. If you look at the southern part of Africa, we have had the problems in Mozambique, and we know that the Al-Shabaab equivalents are fighting in the Gaza province, in those areas in Mozambique. In Somalia, we have also seen that the conflict has not been settled. We've seen the diplomatic spat between the Mogadishu administration and the Hargeisa administration. In Ethiopia, we have seen internally the final problem in Amhara region. Right now, as we speak, there is the tension between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Within the Democratic Republic of Congo, we know that the Kinshasa administration controls only a very small part of the country. We have seen in South Sudan the prosecution, the ongoing prosecution of the first deputy president, Riek Machar. And we have seen in countries, in Tanzania, we have had a very bad election, and Tanzania is yet to come out of it. In Burundi, we see the tensions. In Uganda, we have seen how the opposition has been dealt with. In Kenya, almost 2 years in advance of the election, we see the drums of war being beaten, with people being mobilized from an ethnic standpoint. So one sees an Africa that is not at ease. It's an Africa that does not give promise. And you can see that even in sectors such as provision of food for our people, is actually projected that there's going to be drought. And Africa is going to be a net importer of food. So we see an Africa that is not at ease. And what it would have called for is for us to think forward. What it would have called for is to ensure that we look at critical areas where we become more reliant on ourselves, but we are depending on America for health. We are also depending on America to renew the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, AGOA. We are depending on European powers to patrol our maritime zones. Internally, you see Africans are on the streets in critical areas, the labor movement, there is unrest. We see young Africans trying to go to the United Kingdom and to Europe. Only yesterday, the 17th day of the month of December, I was reading a statement of some young Guinean who was caught trying to cross the Sahara and then to the Mediterranean and on to France. He was asked, but this is death. And he said, but we are dead already.
Sad.
Yeah. Said, but we are dead already. That is the state in which Africa is.
And this frustration have seen a lot of countries, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Mozambique, Morocco, young people causing uprisings because then now they are dead, as the person said. What next for the youth? Because that has been the year 2025 for them, a lot of uprisings and the coups also. So what's next for young people?
And you ask me this question at a time when we have the youngest population on earth, which means we have an obligation to create an environment where they innovate and invent. Remember, we also have artificial intelligence, so that the traditional jobs will also begin to disappear. How are we preparing for it? And in my view, beyond what I call populist schemes We see it here in Kenya, for example, where you have politicians and civil servants running around the country saying, we are empowering people. You give an individual 50,000, you give it to the youth, you give it to women, and then you say they are now business people. And the report that we receive is that most of this money, if not anything between 60 and 70%, is just consumed.
Yeah.
Those are, in my view, we have what I call voodoo economics. It is not anchored on any tried and tested method. So what must be done? I believe it is important to involve our research institutes, our universities, to ensure that we create opportunities for young men and women. And in this regard, we must learn from others who have had this youth problem. The Chinese, they may have their own problem, but they have dealt with the youth problem. How have they dealt with it? The Indians have dealt with the youth problem. How have they dealt with it? And I believe that it is important that we begin to embrace appropriate technology. Look at agriculture. Agriculture could employ people in the millions. Africa is a net importer of food. Are we making agriculture attractive to young people so that we can create opportunities? Why should we be importing, for example, second-hand clothing? If we started consuming our own clothes and leather products, it would create jobs in the millions. And not only in the area of agriculture. If you look at tourism and look at the number of tourists that we are receiving in Kenya, 2 million, if we organize ourselves in the East African region, internally, we would have tourism that is going to generate job opportunities for young people. I read in some newspaper in Kenya not so long ago, I can't remember the author, but he was saying, let us decolonize tourism. Because even our tourism is colonial. The parks were created by the colonizers, and they were places that the European tourists would come and enjoy, and the beaches. Let us look at cultural tourism. So the short answer to your question is that we must create an environment that is going to be beneficial to the people of Africa. And that is how the African Continental Free Trade Area was meant to be useful. I go to West Africa and the tea that I have is Lipton's from the United Kingdom. And I ask, where is Kericho tea? When I see coffee, it's Nescafe. And I ask, where is coffee from Tanzania? When I see some water bottled by American and European companies, I say, but where are the Africans? When I see chicken being imported from Brazil and sugar from Brazil, I ask, and powdered milk from the Switzerland, I ask, the real jobs are being created outside. It can be done. It must be done. Because if we don't do it, what is happening, the young people who are well educated are going to be restless. Yeah. And the net effect is that in the short to medium term, we could have such chaos that it will take generations to bring back the continent where it ought to be. If you ever doubted me, see what is happening in Sudan now.
But part of this conversation, I think, would be promoting or pushing for the Pan-Africanism so that we all unite as one. Then from your experiences moving across, how do you rate how people relate with Pan-Africanism? And is it a thing that is being embraced across?
I think so. When you talk to the people, if you may, in the streets, and when I travel to African countries, I'm not confined to capital cities. I go to rural Africa. People understand. They don't have to speak in English or in French. They could speak in Twi. They could speak Twi. They could speak Amharic. They could speak Yoruba. They could speak different languages, but they want this African thing. And we are talking about Pan-Africanism beyond romanticism, simply because we are coming back to the mother continent. Our Pan-Africanism should be Africa that puts food on the table, that makes sure that we have opportunities. And that is why I and others at Lukenya University, we now have the Pan-African Institute. We have one in Hargeisa in Somaliland. We are opening one in February in Eden, in Lusaka. And the whole idea is to ensure that we talk about Pan-Africanism that makes sense. Some of my friends recently at a mission which was led by my good friend Arikana Chihombo Rikwao and Joshua Maponga were in Burkina. And what we are saying is that we want to have Africans investing in Africa. We have been to Hargeisa, we have been to Malawi, we are planning, subject to several arrangements being made, to go to Ghana, and saying we are putting Africans and people of African descent, Africans in the diaspora, over 250 million of them, to begin to do things in the continent of Africa. And I can tell you, we are receiving and we are coordinating with people in Guyana, in St. Kitts and Nevis, in Colombia, in Nicaragua, in Jamaica, in Cuba, and they are saying the time is now.
Such a beautiful initiative,
Yes.
because it will change. But one of the things that we could need to do to, move the process faster is to break the colonial barriers or borders, so that then we're looking at ourselves as one. How, as Africa, do we get through that?
Remove visas. This idea that when I'm going to Nigeria, I need a visa and I need an entry document and an exit document should die. Kenya, in that regard, started a very good thing. It's saying that all Africans can come here. Good. I think Kenya is doing the right thing. Ghana, I think, is also doing the right thing. And I believe that Rwanda, actually, there is already an African position which says that we should have free movement of peoples. And when we do that and do it effectively, then you'll discover that the people-to-people movement is going to oil intra-African trade. That is the secret. Look at Europe today. You can travel from Bratislava in Slovakia to Lisbon in Portugal, and you don't need anybody's stamp. You are moving goods. The tariff and non-tariff barriers eliminated. That is the direction in which we should be moving.
And hopefully we move towards that.
Oh, we must.
If we are to change Africa.
No, we must move, and we must shout from the rooftops and recruit individuals and recruit heads of states and government, because you need heads of states and government to be converted. And once they are converted, then it will begin to move in the right direction.
Okay. As we conclude this conversation, because we will keep talking, I would want to understand what were your highs and your lows for the diplomatic space across Africa and the world for this year.
I think the high in terms of diplomacy was the decision of South Africa to demonstrate to the world that Africa can be on the right side of history. When South Africa went to the ICJ to pitch for the people of Palestine that there was genocide, to me, that was the diplomatic high.
Oh, that was nice.
The diplomatic low was when I saw heads of state in Africa being paraded in Washington, D.C. to solve a problem in the Democratic Republic of Congo, when I saw African heads of states being treated badly. That to me was painful.
Very painful to watch. Professor, thank you so much for coming through. We appreciate your time. It's always an honor to have you around.
Thank you very much.
And to our viewers.
Thank you.
We hope to see you in the new year.
As the Muslims would say, inshallah.
Inshallah, and more conversations for sure.
Thank you very much.